Have you ever found yourself caught between love, loyalty, and the harsh realities of life? That's exactly where I ended up. My name is Ellen. I'm 53 years old, and my story is deeply entangled with a man named Richard, 62, charming in his own way, but also carrying layers of grief, health struggles, and family complexities. To understand how we reached the breaking point, I have to take you back to where it all started. It was the spring of 2005. Neither of us even wanted to be there that night. A charity event, filled with small talk and meaningless chatter. The kind of evening you only attend out of obligation. The clinking of wine glasses echoed through the venue. Conversations about work and vacations floated in the air. And I remember wondering to myself, why did I even bother showing up? And then, fate stepped in at a buffet table of all places. Richard and I both reached for the same shrimp cocktail at the exact same moment. He chuckled. I laughed. And that small, light-hearted moment opened the door to something much bigger. We started talking. First about the food, then about music, then about films. His laugh was hearty, warm, and contagious. It pulled me in instantly. His hair, streaked with gray, framed a face that carried both wisdom and weariness. And yet, behind that weariness, there was a calm, reassuring presence. Something real in a room full of pretense. That night, we discovered we both loved jazz. The kind of love where you can talk for hours about Miles Davis, or debate which classic film director captured the human condition best. Fellini, Hitchcock, Kurosawa, you name it, we probably covered it. Richard was a widower, and he spoke of his late wife with such tenderness that I could feel the depth of his love and the pain of his loss. He had loved deeply, and he had lost profoundly, and that made him all the more endearing to me. I, on the other hand, was divorced. Over 10 years had passed since my marriage ended. But the scars had left me with a cautious heart. The divorce had been messy years of court battles, emotional roller coasters, and betrayal. It drained me. For a long time, I swore I'd never open myself up again. Vulnerability felt like a trap, something that would only lead to more pain. I built walls around my heart, and convinced myself I was better off alone. So, when Richard came into my life, I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't searching for a partner. I had my career, my hobbies, my circle of friends. I was independent, self-reliant, and, in my mind, content. But Richard had this way of easing himself into my life, not with force, but with patience. He understood grief, because he had lived through it. He understood loneliness, because he had carried it. And in that understanding, I found comfort. Our relationship grew slowly. He didn't rush me, never pushed for more than I was ready to give. Instead, he was steady, kind, and patient. That gentleness chipped away at my walls little by little. Some of my favorite memories are the quiet afternoons we spent walking through the park, sharing stories from our pasts, laughing about small things, or sitting silently with the kind of ease that doesn't require words. Richard made me laugh, really laugh, in a way I hadn't in years. His sense of humor was sharp, but also warm, and it lifted the heaviness I often carried. We filled our evenings with records spinning on the player, old black and white movies flickering on the screen, and long conversations about everything and nothing. It felt natural, like companionship I didn't even know I had been craving. But most importantly, Richard listened. When I told him about my divorce, about the betrayal, the pain, and the scars, he never dismissed me. He didn't tell me to move on or let it go. He listened. He held my hand. His presence was steady and silent, yet more comforting than any words. And in those moments, I began to trust again. Weeks turned into months, months into years, and our connection grew deeper. Richard respected my boundaries, gave me space when I needed it, and offered comfort when I didn't know how to ask for it. He understood balance in a way few people do. And together, we built a companionship that felt strong, safe, and meaningful. For him, I became a new chapter after the loss of his wife. For me, Richard was the man who softened my cautious heart, showing me that love could exist without the chaos I had once known. Still, there was always one shadow lingering in the background. Richard's health. He had chronic conditions, hypertension and diabetes that needed careful management. It was a concern, of course, but I was ready. I loved him, and I was prepared to face those challenges alongside him. I pictured a future where we'd hold each other up, navigate the hurdles together, and grow old in each other's company. As time went on, the idea of marriage naturally came up. To me, marriage was about commitment, security, and recognition of the life we had built together. But Richard? He was hesitant. After a bitter divorce in his past, he was wary of repeating that experience. His main concern was his children. He wanted to make sure his estate passed directly to them, without complications. He told me that love didn't need a legal certificate. And while I understood his reasoning, I also had my own perspective. I had been burned before. And I wasn't going to sacrifice everything without protection. I told him plainly. I'd stand by him, support him, care for him. But I couldn't give the sacrifices of a wife without the acknowledgement of being one. It wasn't mistrust. It was about recognition, fairness, and self-respect. So I suggested a compromise. If he didn't want marriage, then at least let me be his medical power of attorney, someone who could make decisions if he ever faced a crisis. I also asked for the right to remain in his house if I outlived him. To me, these were reasonable requests. But Richard said no. He didn't want to complicate things for his children. Despite that, I continued to support him, love him, and stand by his side. I kept my own financial independence intact. I bought a condo, rented it out, and made sure I had a safety net. That way, I could give him my love without sacrificing my stability. Still, beneath the surface, there was tension. I respected his choices. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that maybe he didn't see me the way I saw him. Maybe, in the end, I wasn't truly part of his family. For years, I pushed those thoughts aside. I told myself to focus on the positives, the laughter, the companionship, the love we shared. And for the most part, that worked. But the unspoken truth lingered in the back of my mind, waiting for the day it would come crashing down. And then, that day arrived. It was about 6 months ago. A normal evening at home. Richard with his newspaper, me with a book. Just another night in our quiet routine. Until suddenly, he slumped in his chair, his face twisted in pain, his words slurred, his arm went limp. I panicked. My heart raced, my hands shook as I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. I thought he was having a stroke. The minutes stretched like hours. I sat by his side, holding his hand, praying the ambulance would come in time. When the paramedics finally arrived, I followed them to the hospital, terrified of what might happen next. And that night, everything changed. When we got to the hospital that night, everything felt like a blur. The sterile fluorescent lights, the constant beeping of machines, the rush of nurses moving with practiced precision. It all overwhelmed me. My heart pounded in my chest as I paced the waiting area, every second dragging on like an eternity. The paramedics had mentioned thanks in advance, a transient ischemic attack, basically a mini stroke. That phrase echoed in my head over and over. I didn't know what it meant for the future, only that it was serious, and that my partner, the man I had loved and supported for over 15 years, was lying behind those double doors in a hospital bed. I wasn't alone in my fear for long. Soon after, Richard's daughter Susan and his ex-wife arrived. Susan had always been a complicated presence in my life, distant, polite at best, often cold, and her mother, well, let's just say she never looked at me like I belonged anywhere near Richard. That night, their true feelings became painfully clear. Susan swept into the emergency ward like she owned the place. She didn't acknowledge me, didn't ask how I was holding up. She went straight to the nurses, demanding updates about her father, her voice sharp and commanding. Her mother followed closely, carrying herself with the same air of authority. And me? I became invisible. When a nurse came out to speak with me, her voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. She explained that Richard's daughter and ex-wife wanted to be alone with him, as a family. They wanted privacy, they wanted me out. At first, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was the one who had called 911. I was the one who had held Richard's hand and prayed with him while we waited for help. I had been his partner for 15 years. 15 years of dinners, conversations, laughter, tears, holidays, struggles, and love. And yet in that critical moment, I was reduced to a bystander. I tried to argue, but the nurse's sympathetic eyes told me the truth. I had no standing, no rights, no recognition. So I stepped aside, pushed out into the hallway like an outsider in a story I had helped write. I paced back and forth, anger and sadness twisting inside me. The humiliation was sharp, but beneath it all, was heartbreak. After all those years of commitment, after giving my heart to Richard, I was still treated as if I didn't belong. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, a doctor emerged. He explained that Richard's condition had stabilized. The thanks in advance was essentially a warning sign. His brain had been deprived of blood flow temporarily. He would need monitoring, medication, and lifestyle adjustments. It was serious, but not immediately life-threatening. Relief washed over me, but it was tangled with exhaustion and the sting of exclusion. When I finally managed to see him the next morning while Susan had stepped out for coffee, Richard's eyes softened as soon as they landed on me. He reached for my hand and whispered an apology for the way his daughter had treated me. But no apology could undo what had already been done. That sense of being pushed aside, of being invisible, had taken root. After he was discharged, I drove him home. The silence in the car was heavy. I knew we needed to talk. to address the reality that had been exposed in that hospital hallway. Sitting in the kitchen with tea in hand, I finally said the words that had been building inside me. Richard, I can't do this anymore. His face fell. He begged me to reconsider, his voice filled with sorrow. But I explained that the hospital incident had stripped me bare. It forced me to see the truth that despite 15 years of love, I wasn't truly considered part of his family. In a crisis, I had no voice, no place, no recognition. I told him that I loved him, but I had to protect myself. I couldn't continue pouring my time, energy, and heart into a relationship where my presence could be erased with a single demand. Richard listened quietly, tears in his eyes, and apologized again. But he didn't change his stance. He still wouldn't make me his medical power of attorney. He still wouldn't secure a place for me in his home. His loyalty to his children outweighed his loyalty to me, no matter how much he cared. And so, with a heavy heart, I packed my things and moved into my condo. Leaving was agony. Every object I put into a box felt like ripping out a piece of my own history. Photos, clothes, little trinkets from trips we'd taken together, they all carried memories I wasn't sure I could bear to revisit. When I closed the door behind me, I felt like I was leaving behind not just a man, but an entire chapter of my life. In the weeks that followed, I was haunted by guilt and sadness. Richard suffered more TIAs, his health declined, and I questioned whether I had abandoned him in his darkest hour. At the same time, there was a quiet relief. A fragile sense of freedom. I had reclaimed my autonomy. I had ensured my stability. But the story didn't end there. One night, my phone rang. It was Susan. Her voice dripped with venom from the very first word. She accused me of being selfish, of abandoning her father when he needed me most. She called me heartless. She said I had never truly cared for him. Her words sliced deep, but I also knew they weren't fair. I hadn't left out of convenience or cruelty. I had left because I was being erased, dismissed, and treated as if my love didn't matter. Still, her accusations planted seeds of doubt that I couldn't ignore. I told myself that maybe, in leaving, I had given her room to step up and take care of him. Maybe that was what she wanted all along. But then came the night when I saw her at a bar, laughing, drinking, staying out late while her father was home alone, frail, and in need of constant care. That's when the doubt shifted into fear. Had I left him in the wrong hands? Seeing Susan at that bar was like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the fact that she was out late, it was the timing. Richard was home, fragile and dependent, while his daughter, who had sworn I was selfish for leaving, seemed more interested in nightlife than responsibility. As I walked past the bar that night, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to go in, confront her, demand to know who was watching over her father while she sipped cocktails. But another part of me held back, knowing that such a confrontation in the middle of a crowded room would only escalate into something ugly. So I continued on with my errands, but the image of her slipping inside lingered in my mind, gnawing at me. That gnawing turned into restless worry. If Susan was neglecting Richard, who was filling in the gaps? Was he safe? Was he cared for? Or was he being left alone, vulnerable, while his daughter tried to escape the reality of his illness? The next day, I called his nurse for an update. She reassured me that Richard was stable, that he was receiving the care he needed. But even as she spoke, I couldn't shake the unease. A nurse's part-time presence wasn't the same as consistent, attentive care. Susan's late-night outings painted a troubling picture. Finally, I reached a breaking point. I needed answers, and I needed them from Susan directly. I called her and asked to meet. To my surprise, she agreed. We arranged to sit down at a local cafe the following afternoon. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a small table by the window. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her posture defensive, her eyes tired but sharp. She looked at me like I was an intruder. I sat down across from her, took a deep breath, and tried to keep my tone calm. "Thank you for meeting me, Susan," she nodded curtly. "What do you want, Ellen?" I didn't waste time dancing around it. "I saw you the other night. At the bar. I'm worried about your father. His condition requires constant care. I just want to know what arrangements are in place when you're not there." Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed into anger. "I'm allowed to have a life," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to take care of him every single day? I need breaks. I need to breathe." I leaned forward, keeping my voice gentle. "I understand, truly. Caregiving is exhausting, and everyone needs relief. But Richard's health is fragile. He can't be left unattended. I just need to know he's safe." Hesme tu nightning in the panets. That was the wrong thing to say. Her face flushed with rage. She leaned across the table, her eyes flashing. "Are you spying on me now? Trying to undermine me? You think you can do better? You have no right to question me." "None." I swallowed my frustration and tried again. "I'm not trying to undermine you, Susan. I just want to help. I love your father, and his well-being matters to me as much as it does to you. This isn't about judging you, it's about making sure he's okay. Her response was icy. You don't live in that house. You don't see what I see. It's easy for you to sit back and criticize. You gave up, Ellen. You left. Don't come back now pretending you care more than I do. And that Tilgen office and the what of the president comment, and represident for mate of the watch. Her words stung. They were unfair, but they weren't entirely untrue. I had left. I had walked away. But not out of indifference, out of self-preservation. Still, to her, my decision looked like abandonment. I tried one last time to bridge the gap. Susan, we both care about him. This doesn't have to be a fight. We could work together. But she was done. She pushed her chair back so abruptly it screeched against the cafe floor. Stay out of my way, Ellen. You're not helping anyone. And with that, she stormed out, leaving me sitting there, stunned, staring at the empty chair across from me. The conversation had accomplished nothing. If anything, it had widened the rift. As I left the cafe, I felt the weight of helplessness settle over me. Susan was defensive, angry, and unwilling to listen. But beneath all that fire, I could see something else. Desperation. She was drowning in responsibility, lashing out because she didn't know how to cope, and yet, knowing that didn't make things easier. I couldn't abandon Richard completely, even if Susan wanted me gone. So I kept my distance. But I remained vigilant. I checked in regularly with his nurse. I gave the caregivers my number in case of emergencies. And I visited Richard when I could, slipping in quietly when Susan wasn't around, just to see his face light up when I walked through the door. Those visits were bittersweet. He was always happy to see me, but I could see the tension etched in his features. He was grateful for Susan's efforts, but the weight of their strained relationship was undeniable. He missed me. He said as much, though gently, in whispers that carried sadness as much as affection. The months dragged on. Susan's hostility never softened, and each encounter with her felt like walking through a minefield. But my bond with Richard endured, a quiet thread tying us together despite everything. Then, one cold afternoon, I visited unannounced. As I approached the house, I heard raised voices inside. I froze on the porch, my hand hovering near the door, listening to the sharp, accusatory tone of Susan's voice. You're not doing your job properly, you're fired. A moment later, the front door swung open. Richard's caretaker, his lifeline, stormed out, her face flushed, and eyes brimming with tears. She nearly bumped into me. Wait, what happened? I asked, reaching out to stop her. Her voice was shaky. It's nothing. Just a misunderstanding. She shook her head and hurried down the walkway, her shoulders slumped. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. Susan had just fired the caretaker. Without warning. Without a replacement. When I finally stepped inside, Richard was slumped in his chair, looking older and more worn than ever. His smile was weak, his eyes heavy with sadness. What happened? I asked gently, taking his hand. He sighed deeply. Susan thinks the caretaker wasn't doing enough. She's been stressed. She wanted to handle things herself. I clenched my jaw, trying to hide my frustration. Richard needed consistent, professional care. This wasn't optional. But Susan's stubbornness, her need for control, was putting him at risk. In the weeks that followed, his health declined. Without a full-time caretaker, the burden fell entirely on Susan, and while she insisted she could handle it, the truth was painfully clear. She was overwhelmed. Richard looked more fatigued each time I saw him. The house felt tense, charged with unspoken conflict. I tried to suggest solutions. Richard, maybe we could hire someone new, someone Susan approves of. That way, you get the care you need, and she doesn't feel pushed aside. But he shook his head slowly, resignation etched in every line of his face. I've tried. She doesn't trust anyone else. She insists it's her responsibility. It was a dead end. My hands were tied. And yet, the more I watched, the clearer it became. Susan's control wasn't helping. It was hurting. Richard was paying the price. One evening, as I was leaving Richard's house, I ran into the former caretaker at the grocery store. She looked different, healthier, calmer, but her eyes still carried that trace of sadness I had noticed the day Susan fired her. I hesitated, then approached. Hi, I said gently. I just wanted to say I'm sorry about what happened at Richard's. Can you tell me why Susan let you go? She glanced around nervously, as if worried someone might overhear. Then sighed. Susan's difficult to work with. She has very high standards, gets frustrated easily. I tried my best, but nothing seemed to satisfy her. I think she's under a lot of pressure, and it's affecting her judgment. That was they Davely. Her words confirmed what I already knew. Susan wasn't handling the situation well. And Richard, fragile, sick, dependent, was the one suffering. The caretaker touched my arm lightly before walking away. Please, keep an eye on him. He really does need the support. And as much as Susan lashes out, she needs help too, even if she'll never admit it. I stood there in the grocery aisle, frozen between sadness and determination. I couldn't abandon Richard, not while his health was deteriorating and his daughter was spiraling under the weight of responsibilities she clearly couldn't manage. So I decided to try again. I called Susan and suggested another meeting, hoping we could find some kind of middle ground. To my surprise, she agreed. The next morning, we met at another cafe. Susan looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her face drawn and pale. She was already sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was the only thing holding her together. I sat down and tried to keep my tone steady. Good morning, Susan. I wanted to talk about your father. His health is declining, and I really think we need a sustainable plan. Maybe we could bring in a professional nurse, someone trained who could relieve some of the pressure on you. Her reaction was instant and explosive. Her eyes flashed with anger. She leaned across the table, her voice low and venomous. Who the hell do you think you are, Ellen? This is my family. My responsibility. You have no right to interfere. Her words stung, but I stayed calm. Susan, this isn't about interfering. It's about Richard's well-being. He deserves consistent care. We can't pretend this isn't serious. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Don't feed me that line. I know what you're after. You just want control. You want access to his estate. Don't think I don't see through you. Her accusation hit me like a slap. I felt my face flush with anger. That's not true, and you know it. I've been with Richard for 15 years. I've never cared about his money. I care about him. This is about his health, not his estate. But her expression hardened. She leaned back, crossing her arms, her eyes cold. I don't need your help, Ellen. And I don't need you meddling in our family business. Stay out of it. I sat there for a long moment, staring at her, realizing how far gone things were. Her hostility wasn't just about me. It was deeper, rooted in her own fears, her own bitterness, maybe even her own unresolved pain. But whatever the reason, she wasn't going to let me in. Finally, she stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Don't ever talk to me about this again, she snapped. And stay away from my father's affairs. She stormed out, leaving me sitting there, shaken but not entirely surprised. As I drove home, I replayed her words in my head. You want his estate. That was the dagger she kept twisting, the accusation she used whenever I tried to help. But the truth was, her anger had little to do with money. She was drowning, and instead of asking for help, she lashed out at the one person willing to give it. Still, the bottom line was clear. Richard's care was suffering. And no matter how much I loved him, Susan wasn't going to let me fix it. 2 weeks passed. I made the painful choice to step back, to focus on myself, on my work, on reclaiming some of the life I had lost in the storm of his illness and his family drama. I told myself it was necessary, that I couldn't keep banging on a door that was locked shut. The first days were brutal. I felt guilty, selfish, even cruel. But slowly, I started to breathe again. I reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies I'd neglected, and found moments of joy in small, ordinary things. For the first time in years, I wasn't living under the constant shadow of crisis. But just as I began to feel the tiniest bit of relief, the phone rang. It was Richard. His voice was soft, weak, but filled with emotion. Ellen. It's good to hear your voice. I've missed you. My heart twisted. I've missed you too, I admitted, trying to keep my tone steady. He sighed heavily. You haven't been by. Susan. She's gone a lot. At night, mostly. Sometimes she doesn't come home until late. I'm alone. I'm struggling. His words pierced me. I had thought, maybe foolishly, that Susan would rise to the occasion after I left. That she'd finally step up fully. But here was the truth. She was leaving him alone, neglecting him, while I stayed away out of some attempt at self-preservation. I closed my eyes, guilt washing over me. I didn't know, Richard. I thought she was taking care of you. She tries, he said quietly. But it's been hard without you. It is real life satyrs. I wanted to promise him everything. To rush over, move back in, fix it all. But the reality was complicated. The rift between me and Susan had only grown deeper. And Richard's refusal to give me any legal recognition meant I was always at risk of being shoved out again. So instead, I chose honesty. Richard, I think we've grown apart. Things have been difficult for both of us. And I don't know where we stand anymore. There was silence on the other end. Then, softly, he said, I see. I just wish things were different. We said goodbye, but my chest ached long after I hung up. In the days that followed, I tried to focus on my own life again. But his words haunted me. The thought of him sitting alone, night after night, abandoned by the one person who had accused me of abandonment, it was unbearable. And just when I thought I couldn't feel any heavier, the phone rang again. This time, his voice was weaker. Ellen. I need your help. Susan. She's gone almost every night now. I can't keep up. Please. And this time I couldn't ignore him. I'll come tomorrow, I promised. We'll figure something out. The next day, when I arrived at his house, the sight of him broke my heart. He looked frail, smaller somehow, as if the weight of everything had shrunk him. His eyes lit up when he saw me, but there was sadness there too, an unspoken recognition of how much had changed between us. We sat together, and he told me everything. Susan's absences had grown more frequent. Sometimes, she wouldn't even explain where she'd gone. He was left to fend for himself, struggling with even the simplest tasks. I don't know what's gotten into her, he whispered. She used to be so responsible. Now it's like, she's avoiding me. I reached for his hand. Richard, I'm going to help you. We'll get through this. Together. For the first time in weeks, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever had happened between Susan and me, whatever scars lingered, Richard needed me. And I wasn't going to let him down. In the days that followed, I threw myself into helping Richard again. It wasn't about rekindling what we once had. It was about compassion, about duty, about love that still lingered despite everything. We sat together at his kitchen table, papers and brochures spread out between us, discussing options. Richard, I said firmly. We need professional help. Someone trained, someone consistent. We can't keep going like this. He nodded weakly. I know. I don't want to upset Susan. She insists it's her responsibility. I squeezed his hand. I understand, but she's not managing. And you're the one paying the price. This isn't about pride, Richard, it's about survival. He sighed, defeated. All right. Let's see what we can do. So, I got to work. I contacted a home care agency, coordinated schedules, and arranged for Emily, one of the part-time nurses he already knew, to increase her visits. Emily was a godsend, gentle, reliable, professional. Her presence instantly brought a measure of stability back into Richard's fragile world. But while Richard seemed relieved, Susan was nowhere to be found. I left messages for her, called her phone, even sent texts, but she ignored me. It was clear she wanted no part of these decisions. Then one evening, as I was sitting by Richard's bedside, the front door creaked open. Susan stumbled in. It was late, well past midnight. Her clothes were rumpled, her eyes glassy, her movements unsteady. She smelled of alcohol. When she saw me sitting there, her surprise quickly curdled into rage. What are you doing here? She demanded, her voice sharp and slurred. I stood, keeping my voice calm. I'm here to help Richard. He's been struggling, and we needed to make some arrangements for his care. Her eyes narrowed, her arms crossed in defiance. I don't need your help, Ellen. This is my family, my responsibility. I took a steadying breath. Susan, it's clear you're overwhelmed. There's no shame in asking for support. But Richard needs consistent care. And right now, he's not getting it. Her laugh was bitter, almost cruel. Don't act like you care. You just want to stick your nose in so you can get your hands on his estate. I know your type. The accusation cut deep, but I didn't let my voice waver. This isn't about money. This is about Richard's well-being. He deserves the best care possible. We both love him, and he needs us to work together. But my calm words bounced off her like stones against a wall. She glared at me one last time, then stormed upstairs, leaving me standing in the living room, my heart pounding. Richard, frail and exhausted, reached for my hand. Don't fight with her, Ellen, please. I sat down beside him again, brushing his hair back gently. I'll try. But she can't go on like this, Richard. And neither can you. In the weeks that followed, I continued to help quietly. I visited often, coordinated with Emily, and made sure Richard had everything he needed. Susan's hostility never softened, but she didn't stop me either. It was as if she had retreated into her own chaos, leaving me to pick up the pieces in her absence. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice was calm, but urgent. Ellen, she said, Richard's had a fall. He's being taken to the hospital now. I thought you should know. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, my heart hammering the entire drive. When I arrived at the hospital, I found him lying in a bed, pale, but conscious. Relief flooded me as his eyes fluttered open, and he whispered, Ellen, you're here. I took his hand gently. I'm here. You're safe. But the relief was short-lived. The door swung open, and Susan stumbled in. She reeked of alcohol, her movements clumsy, her eyes wild with anger. She glared at me with venom. What are you doing here? She spat. Haven't you done enough? I tried to remain calm. Susan. I'm here to check on Richard. He just had a fall. This isn't about us, it's about him. Shut up. She screamed, her voice echoing off the sterile walls. You're always meddling, always interfering. This is my family, not yours. Something inside me snapped. Months of frustration, guilt, and hostility boiled over. Before I could stop myself, my hand flew up and slapped her across the face. The sound echoed in the small hospital room, followed by stunned silence. Susan's eyes widened, then narrowed into fury as she lunged at me. Nurses rushed in, pulling us apart before it escalated further. You'll pay for this, you selfish witch. She screamed as they dragged her away. But the words that cut deepest came not from Susan, but from Richard. His voice was weak, but firm. Ellen. Go home. You shouldn't have hit her. Just go. I turned to him, my heart breaking. Richard. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Just go. He repeated, closing his eyes as if shutting me out completely. Tears burned my eyes as I backed out of the room, my chest aching with shame and regret. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I kept my distance, trying to process what had happened. The guilt was overwhelming. I had let my frustration boil over into violence, something I never thought I was capable of. One evening, the phone rang again. It was Emily. Her voice was gentle. Ellen, I just wanted to check in on you. I heard about what happened at the hospital. I sighed, the weight of it pressing down on me. It's been hard, Emily. I don't know how to make things right. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, sometimes it's not about fixing things. Sometimes it's about finding a way to move forward, even if it's not the way you envisioned. Her words stayed with me. That night, I sat down and wrote Richard a letter. I poured out everything, my regret, my frustration, my love, my fear. I explained why I had lashed out, that it came from a place of desperation, not cruelty. I apologized, not knowing if he would ever read it, or if it would matter, but it was the only way I knew to reach him without causing more conflict. A month passed after that night in the hospital. I hadn't heard from Richard. Not a call, not a message. Nothing. The silence weighed on me like an anchor. And though I tried to bury myself in work meetings, deadlines, endless piles of tasks, the guilt and sadness never truly let go. I told myself I was doing the right thing by stepping back. That maybe my absence would give Susan room to care for her father the way he needed. That maybe Richard would heal, both from his fall and from the fracture between us. But life has a way of throwing unresolved truths back at you when you least expect it. One afternoon, while chatting with a mutual acquaintance, I overheard something that stopped me cold. In a hushed tone, they mentioned Susan. Not her usual sharp personality or her bitter hostility, but something darker. They said Susan had contracted HIV due to her reckless behavior. The words echoed in my head like a siren. HIV. Reckless behavior. Susan. At first, I couldn't even process it. I felt numb. Like my brain was refusing to connect the pieces. But then the implications hit me. And a chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, so many things made sense. Her erratic mood swings. Her late-night outings. Her hostility toward me that seemed fueled by something deeper than resentment. Susan hadn't just been overwhelmed by caregiving. She had been carrying a devastating secret. One that explained her self-destructive behavior. And the worst part? Richard didn't know. I drove home in a daze, my thoughts spiraling. The man I loved was already fighting his own battles with fragile health. And his daughter, the one person he thought he could rely on, was unraveling under the weight of an illness she had kept hidden. That night, sitting in the quiet of my living room, the walls seemed to close in around me. I thought about Susan's anger, her accusations, the venom she had hurled at me again and again. And now I saw it differently. Her rage wasn't just about me, it was about her own suffering, her own fear, her desperate attempt to control something when everything else in her life was slipping away. I thought about Richard too. About how he still believed his daughter was strong enough to handle his care, when in reality, she was barely holding herself together. The guilt twisted in my stomach. I had walked away, thinking it would be easier for everyone if I stepped aside. But what if that decision had left Richard more vulnerable than ever? What if Susan's hidden illness was driving her deeper into chaos, leaving him neglected in ways he couldn't even admit? I tried to go about my routine, answering emails, attending meetings, but my mind kept drifting back to that revelation. Every time I pictured Susan's furious eyes, I also saw the pain she had been hiding. Every time I remembered Richard's frail smile, I thought of the loneliness he had confessed to me on the phone. The weight of it was unbearable. One evening, as I sat with a cup of tea, the memories of my last confrontation with Susan replayed in my mind. The accusations, the screaming, the slap. I hated myself for losing control, for letting anger speak louder than compassion. But now, knowing what she had been carrying, That regret burned even hotter. Had I been too harsh, too blind to see the signs of her suffering? Susan's late-night escapades weren't just irresponsibility. They were cries for help. Symptoms of pain she didn't know how to face. Her hostility toward me wasn't only about territory, it was about fear, about shame, about a desperate attempt to keep her secret from consuming her completely. And Richard's sweet, frail Richard was caught in the middle, dependent on a daughter who was breaking apart. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The dysfunction in Richard's life wasn't just about illness. It was about family scars that stretched back decades. His bitter divorce, Susan's resentment toward her mother, who had remarried and built a new family without her. The fractured foundation that had left Susan clinging to her father as her last anchor even as she struggled with her own demons. Now, her illness was like a shadow cast over everything. And it explained so much more than I wanted to admit. I realized then that I had a choice. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo the years of tension between Susan and me, or the mistakes I had made. But I could decide how to move forward. Did I tell Richard the truth about his daughter, risking breaking what little peace they had left? Did I confront Susan, knowing it would probably ignite another explosion? Or did I step in quietly, offering support in whatever way I could, even if it meant being hated for it? For days, I wrestled with those questions. I replayed every moment in my head, weighing every possibility. And through it all, one thought kept surfacing. Susan didn't need more judgment, she needed understanding. She needed help. And Richard, fragile, loyal, loving Richard, deserved to know what was happening in his daughter's life before it was too late. But how could I do it without causing more harm? How could I step into their fractured world without tearing it apart completely? The truth was, there were no easy answers. There never had been. As I sat at my desk late one night, staring at the letter I had written Richard weeks before, I realized that this was the story of our lives together. Love entwined with grief, compassion tangled with conflict, devotion shadowed by secrets. I didn't know what the next step would be. But I knew this. I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Not anymore. Richard deserved better. Susan deserved compassion. And I had to find the strength to step back into the storm. Even if it meant facing the consequences all over again. The days after learning Susan's secret felt like walking through fog. Every thought, every decision, was clouded by the knowledge I now carried. I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet, not Richard, not even Emily, the nurse who had become a quiet ally in all of this. But the weight of it pressed down on me constantly. Every time I called to check on Richard, I wondered, should I tell him? Every time I thought about Susan, I pictured her not just as the angry, defensive woman who had screamed at me in cafes and hospital rooms, but as someone terrified, ashamed, fighting a battle she couldn't bring herself to reveal. One evening, I finally decided I couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. I had to see for myself how Richard was really doing. When I arrived at his house, I was greeted not by Susan, but by Emily. She seemed surprised but relieved to see me. "He's in the living room," she said softly. "He's been quieter lately. We do what we can, but..." Her voice trailed off. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. Richard was in his usual chair, a blanket draped over his lap, a book resting forgotten in his hands. When he saw me, his face lit up with a warmth that made my chest ache. "Ellen," he whispered, his voice weak but filled with emotion. "You came." I smiled, blinking back tears. "Of course I did. How are you feeling?" He shrugged slightly, the gesture frail. "Tired. Lonely. But seeing you. That helps." We talked quietly for a while. About small things, books, music, the weather. But beneath it all, I sensed a heaviness. Something unspoken weighing him down. Finally I asked, "Richard, is Susan here?" His eyes flickered with sadness. "She's been out a lot. I don't ask questions anymore. She comes and goes as she pleases." I hesitated, then reached for his hand. "Do you want me to step in more? To help with arrangements, maybe bring in extra support?" He sighed. "I don't want to push her away. She's my daughter. She's all I have left." The words pierced me. All I have left. And I realized just how deeply his love for her ran, despite everything. I wanted to tell him the truth. To warn him about her condition, her reckless behavior. The danger she was putting not only herself but him in as well. But the words stuck in my throat. How could I shatter him with that knowledge, when he was already so fragile? So instead, I squeezed his hand tighter and said, "I'll keep checking in. You're not alone, Richard. I promise." In the weeks that followed, I tried to find balance. I increased my visits, coordinated with Emily, and quietly monitored the situation as best I could. Susan, true to form, avoided me completely. She came and went at odd hours, her interactions with me cold and clipped when we crossed paths. But then one night, everything came to a head. I arrived unannounced, hoping to catch Richard before bedtime. As I walked up the steps, I heard shouting from inside. A woman's voice, angry, sharp, familiar. "Susan." I froze at the door, listening. "You're not doing your job properly," she yelled. "You're fired." A moment later, the door flew open, and one of Richard's new caregivers stormed out, her face pale and her eyes brimming with tears. She nearly collided with me on the porch. "What happened?" I asked urgently. She shook her head, her voice trembling. "Susan. She doesn't think anyone is good enough. I can't do this anymore." With that, she hurried down the walkway and disappeared into the night. I stepped inside, my chest tight with anger and fear. Richard was sitting in his chair, looking worn and defeated. When he saw me, he managed a weak smile. "Ellen," he said softly. "It's good to see you." I hurried to his side. "Richard, what happened? Why did she fire the caregiver?" He sighed, leaning back against the chair. "Susan thinks she wasn't doing enough. She's been under so much stress. She takes it out on everyone." I clenched my fists, struggling to stay calm. "Richard, you need consistent care. She can't just dismiss people like this." "I know," he whispered. "But she insists it's her responsibility. She won't listen to reason." I felt a surge of helplessness. Susan's control was suffocating him. Her refusal to accept help was jeopardizing his health. And yet, he was too loyal, too loving, to stand against her. As I sat with him that evening, I realized the painful truth. I couldn't save him alone, not without Susan's cooperation. And she had made it painfully clear she didn't want mine. Later that week, I ran into the former caregiver at the market again. This time, she was calmer, but her eyes still carried sadness. I approached her cautiously. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said gently, "but can you tell me more about what happened with Susan?" She hesitated, then nodded. "She's difficult. She has impossibly high standards. Nothing anyone does is ever enough. I think she's drowning in pressure, and it's making her unreasonable." I tried, Ellen. I really did, but it was like walking on eggshells every day. "Just a lot of views things, Nema." Her words echoed the truth I already knew. Susan was unraveling, and Richard was suffering because of it. Before we parted, the caregiver placed a hand on my arm. "Please, just keep an eye on him. He needs someone steady. And as much as she resents you, Susan needs help too, even if she'll never admit it." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind raced with possibilities. Should I confront Susan again? Should I go directly to Richard and beg him to let me take more control? Should I expose the truth about Susan's illness, even if it broke him? Every option felt like a trap, a path leading to more pain. But one thing was certain. I couldn't stand back and do nothing. Not anymore. Richard's health was declining. Susan was spiraling. And the fragile balance of their world and mine was on the verge of collapse. The next morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach. Sleep had offered no escape. My dreams were restless, tangled visions of Richard calling for me, of Susan shouting, of doors slamming in my face. When I opened my eyes, reality didn't feel much different. I knew I couldn't keep circling around the problem. Susan's hostility, Richard's fragility, the endless cycle of tension, it was all building toward something that couldn't be ignored any longer. So I called Susan. To my surprise, she answered. Her voice was clipped, cold, but not immediately hostile. "What do you want, Ellen?" "I think we need to talk," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "About your father. About his care. This can't go on like it has." There was a pause. Then, unexpectedly, she agreed. "Fine. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. At the cafe near the library." The line went dead. I arrived the next day early, hoping to steady myself before she came. The cafe was quiet, the morning light filtering through wide windows, painting the wooden tables in gold. I chose a seat near the back, away from prying eyes. Susan arrived 10 minutes late. She looked tired, hollow eyes, skin pale, movements restless. A coffee cup in hand, she slid into the chair opposite me with barely a glance. I started carefully. "Thank you for coming. I know things between us haven't been easy." She gave a humorless laugh. "That's one way to put it." I folded my hands on the table, steadying my breath. "Susan, I've been really worried about your father. His health is declining. He needs more care than he's getting, and I think we need to bring in professional help." Her eyes snapped up, blazing. "No, absolutely not. I told you before, this is my responsibility. I don't need you interfering." Well, I tried to stay calm, though my pulse was pounding. "Susan, this isn't about control. It's about Richard's well-being. He deserves consistent professional care. You can't do this alone, and there's no shame in that." Her laugh this time was sharp, bitter. "Don't pretend you care. I know why you're really here. You want control. You want access to his estate. You think I don't see it? Her words stung, but I leaned forward, my voice low, steady. I've been with your father for 15 years. If I cared about his money, don't you think I'd have walked away long ago? This isn't about his estate, Susan. This is about him, about making sure he's safe. Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing. Save your speech. I don't need you, Ellen. And I don't need your fake concern. My patience cracked, just a little. This isn't about needing me. It's about facing reality. Your father is sick. He needs help. Pretending you can do this all by yourself isn't strength, it's denial. And it's hurting him. Her face flushed red. She shoved her chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. I'm done here. Stay out of our lives. She stormed out, leaving me sitting in the cafe, heart hammering, the eyes of strangers on me. I drove home in silence, my thoughts spinning. No matter what I said, no matter how gently or firmly I tried, Susan refused to listen. She saw me as a threat, an enemy, when all I wanted was to help. And yet, beneath her fury, I had seen something else that morning. Not just anger, fear, exhaustion, a desperation she couldn't hide. No matter how hard she tried to mask it behind her barbed words. It broke my heart, but it also made me more determined. 2 weeks passed. I forced myself to step back, to focus on my own life. I reconnected with old friends, immersed myself in work, tried to rebuild the pieces of me I had let slip away. At first, it felt impossible. Every day, I fought waves of guilt. But slowly, I began to breathe again. The freedom of waking up without dread, of not constantly walking on eggshells, was liberating. Still, Richard never left my thoughts. Then one night, my phone rang. His name lit up the screen. My heart leapt as I answered. Richard? His voice was soft, weary. Ellen, I've missed you. You haven't been by. Tears pricked my eyes. I'm sorry. I thought, maybe it was best to give you and Susan space. I've been so lonely, he confessed. Susan leaves at night. Sometimes she doesn't come back until late. I don't know what to do. My chest tightened. The guilt was unbearable. I didn't know, I whispered. I thought she was taking care of you. She tries, he said quietly. But it's not enough. Ellen, I need you. The words cut through me like a knife. I'll come tomorrow, I promised. We'll figure something out. Together. The next day, I went back to his house. When Richard opened the door, the sight of him nearly broke me. He looked frailer than ever, his frame thin, his movements sluggish. But when his eyes met mine, there was warmth, relief. Ellen, he said softly. You came. I hugged him gently, afraid of how fragile he felt in my arms. Of course I did. We sat together in the living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. He told me about Susan's erratic behavior, her frequent absences, her silence when he asked where she'd been. I don't know what's gotten into her, he admitted. She used to be so dependable. Now, it's like she's avoiding me. I listened, my heart aching. I wanted to tell him everything. To reveal the truth about her illness, the secret she was hiding. But how could I? How could I put that weight on him, when he was already so weak? Instead, I took his hand in mine and said, Richard, I'm going to help you. We'll get through this. Together. And for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of peace in his eyes. The following days were a blur of action. Once I had promised Richard that I would help him, I knew I couldn't afford to hesitate anymore. He needed structure, stability, and support. And Susan clearly wasn't providing it. So, I began making calls. I reached out to home care agencies, spoke with nurses, and reconnected with Emily, the part-time caregiver Richard already trusted. He needs consistency, I told her. Can you take on more hours? Her voice was steady, warm. Of course. Richard's a good man. I'll do whatever I can. That was one small victory. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Susan was still in control of the household, and she would fight me at every turn. Still, Richard deserved better than neglect. And if Susan wanted to see me as the enemy, then so be it. I'd rather face her anger than watch him suffer in silence. That evening, I sat with Richard at the kitchen table, going over the plans. He listened quietly, nodding slowly as I explained. I've arranged for Emily to come more often, I said gently. She'll take care of the daily tasks, meals, medications, making sure you're comfortable. You won't have to rely on Susan being here all the time. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Ellen, she's not going to like this. I know, I admitted. But Richard, this isn't about what she likes, this is about you. About keeping you safe. It's safe we were so crack of the round. When a nod and what of the round, he gave me a small grateful smile. You always think of everything. My heart twisted. I just want you to be okay. The next few days went smoothly enough, at least on the surface. Emily's presence made a difference immediately. Richard looked brighter, calmer, more at ease knowing someone dependable was there, but Susan's absence became harder to ignore. She would disappear for hours, sometimes entire nights. When she returned, her eyes were bloodshot, her hands trembling, her temper volatile. One night, as I sat with Richard in the living room, I heard the front door slam. Susan stumbled in, disheveled and reeking of alcohol. Her eyes locked on me instantly. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. I rose slowly, keeping my voice calm. "I'm here with your father. We were just talking." "You have no right," she snapped, her words slurred. "This is my house. My family. Get out." Richard tried to intervene, his voice weak. "Susan, please," but she cut him off, her glare still fixed on me. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Playing the savior. But I see through you. You're just waiting for him to die so you can swoop in." The accusation burned, but I forced myself not to rise to it. "Susan," I said softly. "This isn't about me. It's about your father. He needs more care than you can give on your own. Emily is helping. I'm helping. This is for him." Her face contorted with fury. "I don't need your help. And he doesn't either." She stormed upstairs, the sound of her footsteps echoing like gunfire through the quiet house. Richard slumped back in his chair, his face etched with sorrow. "I'm sorry, Ellen," he whispered. "She's not herself these days." I reached for his hand. "I know. And that's why I'm not going anywhere." But Susan's behavior only got worse. One evening, I arrived to find Emily waiting outside on the porch, her face tense. "She won't let me in," Emily whispered. Susan locked the door. "Well, to read my dance to want. Liken, and I will down of the K." My stomach dropped. I knocked firmly, and after a long moment, the door creaked open. Susan stood there, her eyes wild. "He doesn't need you," she hissed. "Either of you, leave us alone." Behind her, I could see Richard sitting in his chair, pale and confused. "Susan, stop this," he pleaded weakly, but she slammed the door shut, the lock clicking into place. Emily and I stood there on the porch, stunned, helpless. I clenched my fists, fighting back tears. This has gone too far. The next day, I went back. This time, Susan wasn't home. Richard let me in, and we sat together in the quiet. He looked frailer than I'd ever seen him, his hands trembling as he held his cup of tea. "Ellen," he said softly. "I don't know what's happening to her. She used to be so responsible. Now, it's like she's slipping away." I swallowed hard, debating whether to tell him the truth. The secret I'd been holding pressed against my chest, begging to be spoken. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not when he looked so fragile, so desperate to hold on to hope for his daughter. Instead, I said, "We'll find a way, Richard. I promise. You're not alone." He gave me a weary smile, and for a moment, I believed it. But deep down, I knew the storm was only getting closer. Susan's secret was eating her alive, and in turn, it was threatening to destroy Richard too. And sooner or later, I would have to decide. Protect the truth to spare him, or reveal it to save him. Either way, someone's heart was going to break. The tension inside Richard's home had reached a breaking point. Every visit felt like walking into a minefield. On good days, I would find him reading quietly, grateful for my company, relieved to see Emily arrive for her shifts. On bad days, I would walk straight into Susan's hostility accusations, slammed doors, icy silence that carried the weight of everything unsaid. But I couldn't turn my back. Not when Richard needed me. Not when Susan was slipping further into chaos. One evening, I drove over unannounced. I needed to see how things really were. Without warning, without preparation. When I stepped inside, the air was heavy, thick with tension. From the back of the house, I heard raised voices. I followed the sound cautiously, my heart hammering. Susan was in the kitchen, standing toe-to-toe with Emily. Her voice was sharp, angry, dripping with venom. "You're useless," she spat. "You don't care about him. You're just here for a paycheck." Emily's voice, steady but strained, responded. "I'm here because your father needs care, Susan. This isn't about money, it's about his health. You don't get to tell me what he needs," Susan shouted. Her fists clenched at her sides. Richard sat at the table, his face pale, his hands trembling as he tried to intervene. "Susan, please," he whispered. But Susan ignored him. She turned on Emily again, her voice rising. "You're done here. Get out. You're fired." Emily froze. "Susan, please. Think about your father." "Get out!" Susan screamed, slamming her hand on the counter. Emily's face flushed with hurt, but she nodded stiffly, gathering her things. When she passed me in the hallway, Her eyes brimmed with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I can't do this anymore. He just of the one be alive to way," and then she was gone. I stood there, stunned, as the weight of what had just happened settled over the house. Richard looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, slumped in his chair, his eyes filled with quiet despair. "Susan," I said, my voice sharp. "What are you doing?" She was helping. "She was here for your father." Susan spun toward me, her face flushed, her eyes wild. "Stay out of this, Ellen. This is my house, my father, my responsibility. I don't need you meddling." I took a step closer, refusing to back down. "You're not helping him, Susan. You're hurting him. Can't you see that?" Her expression hardened. "Don't you dare tell me what I'm doing. You've always wanted to replace me, to take control, to take him away from me. But I won't let you." I opened my mouth to argue. But Richard's weak voice cut through the tension. "Enough," he whispered. His hand trembled as he reached for the table. "Please, I can't do this fighting anymore." The silence that followed was suffocating. Susan glared at me one last time before storming out of the kitchen, leaving Richard and me in the heavy quiet. I rushed to his side, kneeling beside his chair. "Richard, I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have to go through this." He shook his head weakly. "It's not your fault. She's not the same anymore. I don't know what's happened to her." My chest ached with the weight of the truth I was still holding back. I wanted to tell him everything. To explain that Susan wasn't just overwhelmed, she was ill. Fighting a battle she hadn't confessed to anyone. But looking into his weary eyes, I couldn't bring myself to shatter his fragile hope. Instead, I placed my hand over his. "I'll stay tonight. You won't be alone." That night, as Richard slept fitfully in his room, I sat awake in the living room, staring at the darkened windows. The house was too quiet, the silence punctuated only by his uneven breathing down the hall. I thought about the years we had shared, the laughter, the music, the companionship, and I thought about the walls that had slowly been built around us. His refusal to commit fully, his children's hostility, Susan's spiraling behavior. I realized something that night. I couldn't keep playing the role of the outsider anymore. Not when Richard's well-being was on the line. Not when Susan's actions were actively putting him at risk. If she wouldn't accept help, then I had to find another way, even if it meant standing against her. The following morning, I called a home care agency directly. I explained the situation, my concerns, and Richard's urgent need for support. "We'll send someone this week," the coordinator assured me. "We'll do everything we can." It was a small step, but it felt like progress. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control return, but I knew it wouldn't last. Susan would fight me at every turn, and eventually, I would have to decide whether to reveal the truth about her illness, the truth that explained so much of her anger, her recklessness, her desperation. And once I did, nothing would ever be the same again. That afternoon, Richard called me into the living room. He looked pale, exhausted, but his eyes were steady. "Ellen," he said softly, "thank you. For everything. For staying. For helping. For not giving up." My throat tightened. "You don't have to thank me, Richard. I love you. That's all." He smiled weakly. "I know. And I'm sorry. For not giving you more. For not making it easier. You deserved better." Tears blurred my vision as I squeezed his hand. "All I ever wanted was to be by your side. And I still do." For a moment, there was peace. A fragile, fleeting peace in the middle of the storm. But I knew it wouldn't last. Because secrets never stay buried forever, and Susan's secret was about to change everything. The fragile peace in Richard's home didn't last long. For a few days, things seemed manageable. I arranged visits from a home care agency, and for a brief moment, Richard seemed lighter, calmer, even grateful to have reliable support again. Emily still checked in when she could. Though Susan's anger had driven her away from regular shifts, I filled in the gaps, spending hours at the house, making meals, sitting with Richard as he dozed, trying to remind him he wasn't alone. But in the back of my mind, I knew it was only a matter of time before Susan struck again, and she did. One evening, I returned from the kitchen with a tray of tea, and found Richard struggling to sit upright in his chair. His hands shook violently, the teacup he had been holding shattered on the floor beside him. "Richard!" I rushed to his side, heart pounding. He tried to smile, but his lips trembled. "Just dizzy," he whispered. I helped him settle back against the cushions, but the fear that gripped me wouldn't ease. His skin was pale, his breathing uneven. I called the nurse on duty, who arrived within half an hour. After checking his vitals, she confirmed what I had been dreading: he had suffered another mini-stroke. A transient ischemic attack. It was a warning sign, she explained gently. A reminder that his body was fragile, that we had to remain vigilant. As she packed up her things, Susan appeared in the doorway. Her eyes flickered from Richard to me, then to the nurse. "What's going on?" she demanded. The nurse explained calmly, but Susan's face twisted with frustration. "If you people knew what you were doing, this wouldn't keep happening." I bit back a sharp reply. But my patience was fraying. "Susan, this isn't about blame. Your father is ill. He needs consistent care more than either of us can manage alone." Her eyes narrowed. "You just won't stop, will you? Always pushing, always interfering. You think you're so much better than me." Richard groaned softly, the tension too much for him. I turned to Susan, my voice low but firm. "We'll talk about this later. Right now, he needs peace." She glared at me but didn't argue further. She stalked out of the room, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. That night, I sat awake beside Richard's bed, listening to his breathing, watching his chest rise and fall in uneven rhythm. My mind churned with questions, doubts, fears. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Richard's health was declining rapidly. And Susan? She wasn't just neglectful. She was unstable. Dangerous, even. In her refusal to accept help, I thought about the truth I'd been carrying, the revelation about Susan's illness, the reason behind her erratic behavior. It was like a stone lodged in my chest, pressing heavier every day. Should I tell him? Should I risk breaking his heart, shattering what little peace he still had left? Or should I protect him from the truth, even if it meant watching him suffer the consequences of her secrecy? Either choice felt unbearable. The breaking point came a week later. Richard had fallen again, this time in the bathroom. By the time I reached him, he was lying on the floor, dazed, his leg twisted at an odd angle. I called for help immediately, and the paramedics rushed him to the hospital. I stayed by his side, my heart aching as I watched him slip in and out of consciousness. His once strong frame looked fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights. His skin sallow, his breath shallow. Hours passed before the doctors confirmed he hadn't suffered major damage, but the fall had weakened him further. He would need more intensive care moving forward. When Susan finally arrived, she reeked of alcohol. Her eyes were bloodshot, her words slurred. "What happened?" she demanded, though her gaze was unfocused. "You weren't here," I said bitterly. "He fell. He could have died. That why one dawn." She glared at me, staggering closer. "Don't you dare blame me. You think you're perfect? You're nothing but a leech, Ellen." My patience snapped. "No, Susan. I'm the one who's been here. I'm the one making calls, arranging care, staying up nights to make sure he's safe. Where have you been?" Her face twisted with fury. She lurched toward me, but the nurses intervened, pulling her back. Richard stirred, his voice weak. "Stop. Both of you." His eyes flickered toward me, filled with pain. "Ellen, go home. Please." The words cut like a knife. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, to beg him to see the truth. But the look on his face, the weariness, the disappointment stole the fight from me, so I left. The days that followed were a blur of guilt and sorrow. I stayed away, forcing myself to focus on my own life. But every time the phone rang, I jumped, terrified it would be news about Richard. One evening, it was Emily who called. Her voice was gentle, filled with concern. "Ellen, I heard what happened at the hospital. Are you okay?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know anymore, Emily. I don't know if I made things better or worse. You've always had his best interests at heart," she said softly. "Don't lose sight of that." Her words brought a measure of comfort, but not enough to silence the gnawing guilt inside me. Eventually, I sat down with pen and paper, and poured everything into a letter. I wrote to Richard, explaining my actions, my worries, my regrets. I told him how deeply I loved him, how I only wanted him safe. I admitted the frustration and helplessness that had driven me to lash out at Susan, but also my sorrow for letting anger control me. When I sealed the envelope, I prayed it would reach him, that he would read it and understand, because I wasn't sure if I'd ever get the chance to tell him in person again. And as I dropped the letter into the mailbox, I realized something. I couldn't carry Susan's secret forever. Soon, I would have to decide. Protect the fragile illusion Richard clung to, or break it with the truth he deserved to know. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. A month passed after I sent that letter to Richard. Every day, I checked my phone, half expecting, half dreading a call. Would he respond? Would he forgive me? Or had my words fallen into silence, left unread on his nightstand? But the call never came. I tried to move forward. I threw myself into work, into hobbies, into dinners with old friends who had missed me. On the surface, I looked fine. But underneath, a quiet ache never left me. Richard had been a part of my life for 15 years. Letting go wasn't something you could just do. And then, one afternoon, everything shifted again. I was at the grocery store when I ran into an old acquaintance, someone who had known Richard's family casually for years. We exchanged pleasantries, talked about the weather, the rising cost of food, and then, almost as an afterthought, she leaned in, her voice dropping to a hush. "Did you hear about Susan?" she asked. My stomach tightened. "What about her?" The woman hesitated, as if debating whether to continue. "She's sick. HIV. It's all anyone's been whispering about. Apparently it came from reckless choices she made." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. HIV. So it was true. The secret I had stumbled upon weeks earlier, the burden I had been carrying in silence now confirmed, laid bare in a casual whisper in the middle of a grocery aisle. I managed to nod, to thank her for telling me, but my hands trembled as I pushed my cart forward, my mind spinning. That night, I sat in my living room in complete darkness, the silence pressing in around me. Susan's illness explained so much: her erratic behavior, her late-night disappearances, her hostility toward me. She wasn't just angry. She wasn't just irresponsible. She was terrified, drowning in a secret that was consuming her from the inside out. And suddenly, every cruel word, every drunken outburst, every reckless act looked different in my mind. They weren't just attacks, they were cries for help. But Richard didn't know. The thought gnawed at me. His health was fragile, his spirit already weighed down by loss and fear. And yet, the truth about his daughter's condition could destroy him. Should I tell him? Should I risk breaking his heart? Or let him live in ignorance while his daughter unraveled before his eyes? No matter how I turned it over in my mind, the outcome was the same. Pain. The following week, I tried to bury myself in work. But the knowledge haunted me. Every email, every meeting, every task felt trivial compared to the weight of what I knew. At night, I replayed my last confrontation with Susan, the venom in her voice, the pain in her eyes. I saw the exhaustion etched into her face, the hollowness of someone carrying too much. I realized, with a pang of guilt, that I had been so focused on Richard that I had failed to see her, failed to recognize the signs of her suffering. And now, it might be too late to make things right. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer. I drove to Richard's house one quiet afternoon, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was going to say, or whether I had the strength to follow through. When he opened the door, his eyes widened in surprise. "Ellen," he murmured, his voice rough. "I didn't think I'd see you again." I swallowed hard. I wasn't sure either. But I needed to check on you. He let me inside, and we sat together in the living room. The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the words left unsaid. Finally, he spoke. "I got your letter." My breath caught. "And?" His eyes softened, though sorrow lingered in their depths. "I believe you. I know you were trying to help. I wish it hadn't come to that." Tears stung my eyes, but I managed to nod. "So do I." We sat in silence for a while longer, and then, unable to hold back any longer, I asked the question that had been clawing at me. "How's Susan?" His face clouded with sadness. "She's different. Moody. Distant. I don't know what's happening to her. She won't talk to me." My throat tightened. The words were there, begging to be spoken. "She's sick, Richard. She needs you. She's drowning, and you don't even know it." But I couldn't say them. Not yet. Instead, I reached for his hand. "Whatever happens, you're not alone. I'm still here." That night, after I left his house, I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, staring at the darkened windows. The truth was a storm gathering on the horizon, inevitable and unstoppable. And when it broke, it would change everything. All I could do was brace myself and hope that when the storm came, Richard would survive it. As I sit here reflecting on everything that happened, I realize my story is not just about love, or loss, or family conflict. It's about the weight of choices, the ones we make, the ones we avoid, and the ones we're forced into. Richard came into my life when I least expected it. He healed parts of me I thought would stay broken forever, and in return, I gave him years of loyalty, of care, of love that was as real as anything I'd ever known. But love, no matter how deep, doesn't erase complications. His health battles, his children's mistrust, Susan's anger and secrets, all of it built a storm that eventually consumed us. Looking back, I can see the mistakes I made. Times when I let frustration take over. Times when I stayed silent when I should have spoken. Times when I tried to carry too much on my own. But I can also see the truth. I did what I could, with what I knew, with the heart I had. Susan's illness was the cruel twist no one saw coming. HIV wasn't just a diagnosis, it was a sentence of fear, shame, and isolation that she carried alone. It explained her hostility, her late nights, her unraveling. She wasn't just lashing out, she was crying out. And yet, she pushed everyone away, including me. I still ask myself, should I have told Richard sooner? Should I have risked shattering his heart with the truth? Or was I right to let him hold on to his fragile peace? There's no clear answer, only the ache of knowing that no matter what, someone was going to get hurt. When people ask me if I regret leaving, if I regret stepping back when the chaos was too much, my answer is complicated. Yes, I regret the pain it caused him. I regret the nights he felt abandoned, the moments when he needed me and I wasn't there. But I don't regret choosing to save myself. Because in the end, love should not mean losing yourself entirely. Love should not mean erasing your own needs, your own safety, your own identity. And after 15 years of giving, of compromising, of standing in the shadows while others dismissed me, I finally realized, I deserved more. So, am I the villain in this story? Some will say yes. That I abandoned a man in his time of need. That I walked away when things got too hard. Others will say no. That I stood by him for as long as I could. That I gave more than anyone else. That I sacrificed years of my life for someone who never fully gave me a place in his. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. I wasn't perfect. But I wasn't heartless either. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to take away, it's this. Relationships are fragile. They don't just exist in the quiet, happy moments. They are tested in storms, in hospitals, in late-night arguments that leave you raw and exhausted. And sometimes no matter how much love there is, the weight of reality is heavier. If you've ever been in that position, torn between staying and leaving, between loyalty and self-preservation, I want you to know, you're not alone. The world loves simple answers, neat endings. But life doesn't work that way. Sometimes, there is no right choice. Only the choice you can live with. So, I leave you with this question. If you were in my shoes, standing at the crossroads of love and survival, what would you have done? Would you have stayed? Sacrificing yourself piece by piece until nothing was left? Or would you have walked away, carrying both the guilt and the freedom that decision brings? There's no easy answer. But maybe that's the point, because in the end, life isn't about being perfect. It's about being human. And being human means sometimes, we break. Sometimes, we fail. And sometimes, we choose ourselves, even when it hurts. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found yourself reflecting on your own life, your own choices, your own relationships, then maybe my pain wasn't for nothing. And if nothing else, I hope you walk away with this reminder. Take care of yourself. Because at the end of the day, you are the only one who has to live with your choices. And that, friends, is the end of Ellen's story, at least. The end, as she chose to share it. When we step back and look at everything she went through, the story becomes more than just one woman's experience with love, loss, and complicated family ties. It turns into a mirror, reflecting questions we might all face in different forms. Questions about loyalty. Questions about when to stay, and when to walk away. Questions about where our responsibility to others ends, and where our responsibility to ourselves begins. Ellen's journey reminds us that relationships are rarely simple. On the outside, people might have judged her quickly. How could she leave him after his health crisis? Doesn't she care? But when you peel back the layers, you see a woman who gave 15 years of her life, who supported Richard through illness, who sacrificed comfort and stability, and yet, in the end, she was still treated as an outsider. Think about that for a moment. Imagine standing beside someone through the darkest nights, the longest hospital stays, the most frightening diagnoses, and then being told, in so many ways, that you don't belong, that your love isn't legitimate, that your role can be erased in an instant by a daughter, an ex-wife, or a nurse following family-only rules. Wouldn't that break you, too? Then there's Susan. On the surface, she looked like the villain, dismissive, hostile, even cruel at times. But beneath that exterior was a woman silently fighting her own demons, an illness she was too afraid or ashamed to share, a burden she carried alone until it twisted her into someone unrecognizable. And isn't that often the case? The people who lash out the most are usually the ones carrying the heaviest secrets. So, what are the lessons here? First, love without acknowledgement can feel like invisibility. Ellen poured herself into Richard's life, but without the protections of marriage or legal recognition, she was vulnerable. Vulnerable to being pushed aside in emergencies. Vulnerable to being dismissed by his family. Vulnerable to being erased from his story. Second, pain often hides behind anger. Susan's outbursts weren't just about Ellen, they were about years of feeling abandoned, about the fear of losing her father, and about the devastating secret of her illness. Third, self-preservation is not selfishness. Ellen's choice to leave was heartbreaking, yes, but it was also necessary. She recognized that she couldn't keep giving while being denied the basic respect of recognition. She realized that staying meant slowly eroding herself away. Walking away wasn't abandonment, it was survival. And here's where I want to turn the question to you. If you were Ellen, What would you have done? Would you have stayed, accepting a life where your role was always in the shadows, where your love was real but never truly validated? Would you have kept sacrificing until there was nothing left of you, or would you have walked away, carrying the guilt, but also the freedom, of finally choosing yourself? There's no easy answer. That's what makes this story so haunting. When I think about Ellen's letter to Richard, the way she poured out her heart after everything collapsed, I can't help but feel the weight of regret that lingers in her words. She didn't want to hurt him, she didn't want to fail him, she just wanted to protect herself. And in doing so, she discovered that sometimes, protecting yourself comes at the cost of breaking someone else's heart. That's the brutal truth of life. Sometimes there's no path that doesn't leave scars. So, here's the final takeaway. Cherish the people who stand by you. Acknowledge them, validate them, because nothing hurts more than being erased after giving everything. And if you're the one standing in Ellen's shoes, torn between loyalty and survival, remember this. Choosing yourself doesn't make you heartless. It makes you human. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated with you, if it made you think about your own life or your own relationships, let me know. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Was Ellen right to leave? Was Susan more victim than villain? And what does loyalty really mean when love collides with reality? Don't forget to like this video if you found it meaningful, and subscribe for more real-life stories that make us reflect on the messy, complicated, and sometimes heartbreaking truth of being human. Until next time, take care of yourself, and take care of each other. And that's the story. Heavy, messy, complicated, but real. Before we wrap things up, I want to hear from you. Put yourself in Ellen's position. You've stood by someone for 15 years, sacrificed your time, your independence, your emotional energy, and yet, in the most critical moments, you're treated like you don't matter. Would you stay and keep giving? Or would you walk away, even if it meant carrying guilt for the rest of your life? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm really curious how many of you would have chosen differently than Ellen. And let's talk about Susan for a second. She came across as hostile, yes, even reckless. But now that we know her secret, her struggle, her illness, does it change how you see her? Does it make you more sympathetic? Or do you still feel her actions cross the line? I want this to be an open conversation. Because the truth is, stories like this aren't just stories. They're mirrors. They make us look at ourselves, our choices, our families, and wonder, what would I have done? If this video made you stop and think even just for a few minutes, do me a favor. Hit that like button so more people can discover it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We post stories like this all the time. Stories that make you reflect, make you feel, and sometimes even challenge you. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell too. That way you won't miss the next upload. Alright, that's it from me today. Thank you so much for spending your time here, for listening, and for sharing your thoughts. Take care of yourself, and as always, see you in the next story. And remember, life doesn't hand us easy answers, only choices we have to live with. Thanks for watching. Thanks for thinking this through with me. And until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and keep writing your own story.